The music of the 20th century was shaped, at least in part, by the circumstances in which composers lived during that era. Only a tiny number of them actually held full-time jobs that required them to compose on a regular basis, like the court and the church musicians of the past. As we shall see, most of them found employment elsewhere, doing other things, and they composed for the most part on the side, or as an adjunct to the positions that they held. This meant, of course, that they had a lot of time on their hands, far more time than the composers of the past had. And this is what makes 20th century music ever so interesting. In fact, most composers of that time had plenty of leisure in which to contemplate music deeply, and they questioned every element of music. The professional composers of previous centuries did not have the luxury of doing this. All this thinking about the elements of music resulted in interesting experiments, and we're going to see work after work in this and the next unit that was inspired by deep thinking about some aspect of music. Some composers went so far as to reject certain traditional concepts of music, and we shall see this again and again. We will even see one composer who went so far as to invent an entirely new approach to musical composition. It is not that composers of the era felt any animosity toward the art of the past. In fact, most good composers of the 20th century greatly admired their predecessors, but they simply did not feel quite so tied to traditional concepts of music as their predecessors were. They acknowledged these concepts as a matter of fact, but they simply did not follow the precepts in their own compositions. Among the things that composers seemed particularly willing to dispense with were traditional concepts of harmony. As you know from your own experience in this course, music from the beginning of the Renaissance up to the end of the 19th century observed similar principles in terms of harmony. Basically, all the harmonies were tertian. There were conventional means of dealing with consonance and dissonance in them. And although there are differences in detail from the beginning of this era until the end of it, nothing terribly earth-shaking happened in terms of harmony over those 6 centuries or so. Indeed, composers were willing to dispense with something that seems to have become natural and almost a matter of fact for us. For example, if you were to stop people on the street anywhere in the Western world, people who had grown up in the Western cultural tradition, and play them combinations of sounds, you would have almost unanimous opinions on what sounded good or what didn't sound good. Basically, what is consonant and what is dissonant. These notions have been a part of our culture for the past 700 years, and they are likely to persist well into the future. 20th century composers of art music, however, and composers of our own century as well, very often have become indifferent to traditional concepts of consonance and dissonance. This is not because they deplore the music of the past or they think that there's something terribly wrong with it. They just don't feel tied to the precepts of music that have been practiced by musicians in large part over the past 700 years or so. And this is one of the things that people notice about the art music of the 20th and the 21st centuries. And you will notice it too as we examine the works in this and the next unit of the course.